It's week 10 and I'm in Elora. Hey everyone, welcome to the week 10 feedback video. Okay, I'm in the beautiful town of Elora, which is about a 20-minute drive north of Kitchener-Waterloo if you've never been. And I'm walking on the top of what's below me. That there is the Elora Gorge, so a little river that runs at the bottom of it. And I thought this would be a nice spot for my morning walk and also to talk to you guys about week 10, all about quantitative data analysis and how to think about quantitative data analysis and some of the challenges we encounter and some of the solutions that are out there for quantitative data analysis. Okay, so get started. As usual, mini lectures, discussion posts went well. Feedback is posted, as it always is, in Dropbox for the mini lectures in replies to week 10 discussion posts in Learn. Now, as it's starting to get to the end of term now, there's fewer posts, fewer mini lectures, because many of you have already completed those 8 requirements of them this term, which is totally fine. That's normal at this stage, but many of you are still posting, so please do. And still a really interesting discussion in the week 10 discussion board, and definitely worth revisiting. Especially, well, in general anyways, because many of you are going to take SOC 710 next term with Owen, and it's especially relevant for that. But also, if any of you are doing any kind of quant analysis in your research proposals for the end of this term and for your projects in general, definitely material that you should integrate into those research proposals. Okay, so I want to come back to a few things about the more advanced readings from this week. The Smith article, as well as the Pearl and Mackenzie book chapter. So with Smith, now I realize that it's a sociology of religion article. That's my field, that's my area. But what Smith is discussing in the article is very relevant not only to quantitative research in all fields of sociology and publishing quantitative research in sociology, not just sociology of religion, but I think a lot of it is also relevant for qualitative research as well. And so I'll try and touch on that a bit over the next few minutes. So the author, Christian Smith, I actually know Christian quite well. I've gone to visit him during a sabbatical at the University of Notre Dame down in Indiana. And yeah, very prominent person in our field, very strong quantitative methodologist. And he basically has written a lot. He's written a lot of research. He's done a lot of kind of longitudinal surveys with youth on religion in the US. And this article specifically of his is basically him venting to the world about what he sees in the sociology of religion in terms of quantitative methods and is not pleased with, and ways we could improve it. And yes, especially relevant for my field, but like I said, also the case in many other fields of sociology and legal studies. So, he mentions a few kind of key things that we should keep in mind and that we should strive for when doing quantitative data analysis and publishing it in journals. So the first one, we've actually already discussed some. Back in week 6, he was Christian this week is lamenting the fact that we focus maybe a bit too much on theory and not enough on good quality empirical description, and feels like there should be a place, maybe especially in the form of research, empirical research notes, where, maybe theory is not super relevant, a theoretical contribution isn't super important in that case. It's more the empirical, good quality, descriptive piece that is a contribution that currently isn't really valued as much by journals and by peer reviewers. And Christian feels that's kind of a loss. It's not that he doesn't want any theory or anything, but there should be a space for that kind of empirical contribution. And so that's what he's arguing for. I mean, the research note does already exist, and it is used a bit already for that purpose. A lot of people do use it when they have new empirical findings. They don't want to have a huge theoretical discussion because those findings are kind of just building on what's already there and just want to present new findings. A lot of people do already do that in research notes. I think the issue is that a lot of journals, the peer reviewers, still peer review the research note in the same way as a journal article. And so even with the research note, when you're just looking at new methodology or a new empirical finding, a lot of peer reviewers are like, well, where's the theory? It's like, well, it's 10 pages. There's not meant to be theory. It's meant to be focused on new methodology or empirical data. And so I think that's kind of maybe Christian reminding people and saying that maybe this is what research notes, at least in part, should be used for. Just before we continue, I'm at a viewpoint. So there's the creek. There's the, I think it's a river, I guess. That's the Elora Gorge. Oh, so there she is. There we are, one viewpoint. There'll be a few views throughout the walk, so I'll pause when they happen. So that was kind of the first thing raised, but like I said, mentioned that, kind of discussed that in more depth already in week 6, so go back to that feedback video if you want more robust discussion about that kind of descriptive versus theoretical pieces and what kind of value we assign to each in sociology and legal studies. The second point that Christian makes is that we should do more meta-analysis. We are not a field in sociology and legal studies. This is not just sociology of religion, this is all sociology and legal studies. We're not really fields that do meta-analysis a whole lot. And meta-analysis this is where you go and look at all the research that's already published, you bring it together, you analyze each study like a data point. You can do that either qualitatively or quantitatively. And you see kind of, okay, where the findings agree with each other. So we can start saying that like, okay, this is like solid findings, where results still mixed, and what has been covered already and done, and what hasn't yet been done. And so a field that does that a lot is a field like health, right? Health does that. Often PhD students in health will go through, like, I don't know, a topic like, say, the nefarious effects of smoking on health, or the nefarious effects of microplastics on health. And they'll go and look at all the studies that have already been done on it and kind of get a sense, a meta-analysis of all those studies to get a sense where the field is at. Can we now agree on certain findings? And are certain findings still mixed? And are there still things to be done, kind of thing. So it's not that we don't do meta-analyses at all in sociology and legal studies, but we don't do them nearly enough. And so it's actually, if you're looking as a PhD student for a type of study to do that'll get you a publication, and that's actually a very helpful part of your literature review during your lit review, because while you're doing a PhD, the literature review is actually the most comprehensive that you might do in your career. The PhD is the time when don't have a whole lot of other things going on. You've got other things going on, but compared to, like, say, me, a professor or researcher that has at least 6, if not more like a dozen projects on the go, then it's the PhD, you have one project on the go, you can focus a lot of time on that lit review, more than I usually can as a kind of professional researcher that has teaching and service and research and a lot of research going on. And so that's a good time to kind of cover everything in the field that's on your theme, on your topic of study. And that's when you could do a meta-analysis. And this is more than just a lit review, but it is kind of, the lit review is an important component of it. You gather all the studies, you look what they've done, and especially if there's a large number of them, which there usually are now, because there's a lot of people working on various topics, that's when you kind of analyze each study as a data point. What were their findings? Each finding is like considered like a variable almost, and then you analyze, okay, where are the findings congruent? Where do they disagree? And again, you can do that quantitatively, and that's kind of what Christian's talking about in his article this week, but also you can do that qualitatively if you find that's a better way of analyzing all those studies. Okay, next viewpoint, here we go. Ta-da! There's the creek river. Sorry, it's a small river. Again, with the bridge. We'll actually end the video on that bridge, so we'll get back to it. So that was his second point, the kind of importance of a meta-analysis, and I kind of encourage you to think about it. Just because it's not done a whole lot in sociology and legal studies, there's not really a good reason for that. It's more that it's just not a thing we've done that much in this field, but that could actually be very useful. So you can do it while you're doing your lit review, and usually it's a good publication to then publish, like, hey, I've done this meta-analysis on this topic. A lot of journals find that quite useful because, again, not many people are doing it. So third, pet peeve of Christian Smith, if you want, is that for quantitative methods, again, also goes for qualitative methods, there's not enough methodological information being published along with journal articles. I mean, this is more maybe discipline specific. In sociology of religion, because there's not a whole lot of quantitative researchers in my subfield, there is less methodological rigor sometimes and less methodological information being published. I agree with Christian on that, and so it's definitely a thing in our field. In subfields where quantitative methods are less prevalent, yeah, you don't see as much methodological rigor when the study's done, and also reporting of methodological details, even if the study was well conducted. And so, yeah, it's a thing. Other subdisciplines where quant methods are more heavy, like maybe political sociology, I'm thinking sociology of education, some of the big areas like social inequality, those areas will usually have more set ways of doing quantitative research and set things that they're looking for when you publish a quantitative article. But that being said, it's actually a pretty easy fix, to be honest. This is probably the easiest of all the points that Christian raises to address, and a lot of us already are, and he was just complaining that not more people do it. And so the easiest way to do it is now, because all journal articles are also published online as well as in print, we just do online supplementary materials where you can upload additional materials with additional methods info, including potentially your data set if you're able to, so that others can see that info and that data, and then kind of, again, that kind of transparency and rigor and ideal of replicability that we strive for in social science. And so, yeah, I mean, I already do that. The issue before you had those online supplementary materials was that you didn't have a whole lot of space in the article itself, right? You've only got like 35 pages, 10,000 words at most sometimes a bit more, often a bit less. And so you didn't necessarily, you know, every paragraph you used to explain your methodology, you had one less paragraph to explain your results or your findings or your theory. And so you kind of had to have this balance of what do I include, what do I not include. Now there's still that when you write the main article, but you can include any additional information you need, including on findings or methodology or even theory, in the online supplementary material, and just send people to it in a footnote. And that's what I often do for my studies, and that's kind of the normal way of doing it now. And so you'll see that in a lot of areas of sociology and legal studies with a lot of their journals. So keep an eye out that if there's an article that really interests you, there's usually more info online about it. And so get the article, read the article, but also go on the journal's website and look up the online supplementary material, because often the authors have provided more info, the good ones, who provide that methodological detail. And then the last 2 points that Christian raised are actually a kind of good transition to the Pearl and Mackenzie chapters as well. So Christian first mentions that in our current publications, we've been shying away from causality claims. So that is, for example, you know, we are worried that we're overstating our findings. I mean, and so we don't make kind of bigger statements about, you know, we've only found association, we haven't found causality. I mean, yes, there's a history to that. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the pendulum was kind of on Christian side, was that big claims were being made, many of them not substantiated by findings, and most people didn't really understand the fact that, you know, even though big claims were being made, a lot of the evidence didn't actually support many aspects of those big causal claims. And so it's like the field got ahead of itself almost in sociology and legal studies in many ways. And then because of that, in my generation, the pendulum swung back to what Christian is now complaining about, was that, well, like, okay, no, like we've seen some really bad examples of people overstating their findings, so now we're going to be ultra cautious and only, you know, word it in the way that actually is reflecting the data for sure. So like, you know, reminder, it's association, we're not necessarily proving causality here, etc. And Christian, you know, feels that maybe there's a nice middle ground to find where, you know, we make it clear what our results are showing with the data we have, which isn't usually every little chain in the whole little link in the whole chain of causality. So maybe we're showing one small thing, or we're showing association, we're showing part of the chain, but not the whole chain of causality that leads to a phenomenon. But we should probably definitely theorize about that causal chain in the paper, and we should maybe find ways to better test the different links of that causal chain so that we can test as much as we can with the available data and the tools that we have. And, you know, we should use our brains in our conclusions and talk about that causal chain and what it likely is given the theory and findings we have, still being open about the fact that, hey, it's like not perfect and there's still more to be done, more research to be done. And so it's kind of finding that balance. And that's a big part of quantitative research, is this idea of causality and testing these different links in the chain of causality. And that's what the Pearl and Mackenzie chapters are also about, right? And it's a big discussion. Unlike what Pearl and Mackenzie seem to make it sound like in their book, it's definitely not a new discussion. It's always been a big discussion in all of social sciences, but especially quantitative research. It's something we especially care about. And so, so it's kind of finding that balance of reporting the limits of your findings in terms of what they do and don't show about that causality and the causal mechanisms at play in the phenomenon you're studying. But it's also kind of not being too shy about it either. And, being forward of kind of thinking it through with theory and thinking it through with bigger ideas that, will continue to be tested, hopefully, in the years to come in the field. And then finally, part of that is also specifically for quantitative methods, less focus on statistical significance tests. And I totally agree with Christian on this. I can tell the level of expertise someone has with statistics based on how much they talk or don't talk about statistical significance. The beginners, the ones who've taken maybe just 1 or 2 stats courses, talk a lot about significance testing and how important. Look, I got my 3 stars, right? That way of representing a p-value of 0.001 or less. And fine, because that's often the way it's been taught in Western academia. But Christian's totally right. The more advanced you are in statistics, the less you rely on and report statistical significance testing. I almost don't do it now. I mean, I do it because there's always like some beginner reading my papers, but I almost solely now rely on effect size and the kind of importance, the actual size of the associations and the links that I'm studying with my quantitative data. Because often, especially in my case, because I work with large sample sizes, I'm often working with government data that is tens of thousands, if not hundreds or thousands or even millions of respondents' cases, right, with census data, with big StatsCan survey data. And with those big data sets, almost everything is statistically significant, even if in reality the effect size is very small. So like maybe there's a 2% change when my independent variable changes categories, I get a 2% change in my dependent variable change in their categories or size, effect size. That is like a non-existent effect in reality, right? Think of it like 2%, who gives a crap? For me, I only look at a 5% change or more, and even then 5% can still be considered quite small. How do you judge that effect size? Well, one, you have to produce the coefficients to get it first, so you'll learn how to do that with Owen. You've seen some of them already, like regression coefficients that do that. And then you also have to make like a practical call as a researcher, be like, okay, in reality, all right, this is kind of like the applied part of the statistics, is a 5% change actually quite important here? Does it make a difference? Like say in the US election, it does. Voter decision, a 5% change, an impact of an independent variable changing your vote choice by 5% is huge in the US because it's such a tight electoral system at the moment, a two-party system. Whereas in other cases, like with certain health behaviors or outcomes, maybe a 5% change isn't that much practically. And so you have to kind of figure that out based on kind of your own knowledge of the field, your own judgment as a researcher. And when you do that, you're obviously transparent about it. You talk about that in your results section, be like, okay, you know, nothing's statistically significant because I have a small sample size, or everything's statistically significant because I have a large sample size, but here's actually the effect size that seem to be key, and this is my cutoff point, this is how I'm deciding that they're key, and I'm going to report them especially here. And then maybe in the supplementary materials online, you provide a bit more information, right? So keep that in mind when you're in Owen's class next term in 710, most of you will be. You will see statistically significance testing. Sorry, it's early in the morning to say all these terms. And it's not unimportant. Like, it can give you an indication, especially in a kind of regular sized data set of 1,000 to 5,000 people. It can point to, you know, what can actually go beyond random margins of error that you would expect with a random sample to what's actually an important effect. But it's only one indicator of many, and your coefficients of effect size are much better at doing that. So consider both. You produce both. Owen will show you how to do both. But give more weight to the effect size. And again, the more advanced you are in statistics, the more comfortable you become to do that and discuss that and justify that. And so the more you end up doing it. So that's kind of a progression that's happened throughout my career and that I see across a lot of statisticians' careers. Okay, and so like I said, those last 2 points of, you know, not shying away from causal claims when it's supported by theory and at least by some findings, not relying too heavily on statistical significance, but on effect size and understanding causality and testing causality when we can, are also points that Pearl and Mackenzie either directly or indirectly raise in their chapters I also got you to read for this week in the more advanced readings, right? So the idea here that Pearl and Mackenzie are trying to get across is we should be doing more than just measuring association in quantitative data analysis. We definitely should be measuring association, it's kind of crucial, but it's not the only thing going on, and we should think about kind of beyond that, because a lot of our measures in statistics are basic measures of association or more complex measures of association. And we're very good at measuring association. Like, we've got that nailed down now in quantitative data analysis. But there's more to causality and the social world than just association, right? And so keep that in mind when you do your quantitative data analysis next term with Owen. So some key takeaways from the Pearl and Mackenzie readings. I realize they're not the easiest readings to get. It's a very different probably type of reading than we've covered so far this term. But still relevant and still worthwhile. My key takeaways, and again, many of you raised these in the week 10 discussion posts, is again, most statistical models are made to measure association between variables only, so keep that in mind. They're not always proving causality in those more basic ways of measuring association. If you want to measure causality and causal mechanisms, what drives and actually causes a phenomenon, all the variables involved, all the things that played in a complex social world, you know, there are some statistical tools available to you. They're probably not as good and not as well developed as the association measures, but they are out there. And so you can use a combination of those stats models, those kind of more causal-based stats models, and good theory, basically, and your brains, which are geared more towards thinking about causality than, say, our stats models are. And so that's kind of their key argument in their chapters. So think about your stats models that you're going to run, doing your statistical analyses. Think about them as ways of testing different elements of causality, testing different links in that causal change, testing different causal mechanisms as much as you can. Again, sometimes that's possible with the data you have. For example, you can maybe have some intervening variables that you can measure the effect of in that relationship. And, you know, that's what Pearl and Mackenzie discuss in part of their chapter. But sometimes the data has its limitations and you can't necessarily go all the way. I'd say not only sometimes, often. And so, you know, in that case, your good theory and your brain thinking through the results is what comes into play. And you can do that, right, in papers, in your dissertations, in your theses, but you just have to be transparent and open about it, that that's what you're doing. That, okay, here's what the data actually shows, here's what the theory, how we can interpret that based on good theory, and here is the theory, and so here's the contributions that this can make, and here's what we still need to test in future to continue testing this theoretical model and see if it actually is applicable in the social world. Sorry, just turning my notes over here. So, and that basically comes back to Christian's point from earlier, is don't shy away from doing that. Just be aware that you're doing it and kind of know what's possible with the data you have and the tools that you have to test certain aspects of causal mechanisms. And then know where the gaps are and where theory has to come in, at least for this current study, and maybe future research collects better data or different data on that. And so, yeah, you're going to find this out. In a perfect world, we'd have longitudinal data where we follow individuals over time, so we get a sense of time order. When one thing changes, it leads to something else. We'd be able to measure association there. We'd be able to measure time order, another important aspect of causality. We would have data on all the important variables in that data set, so we could measure how all the different variables are at play. And there would be no errors in the data, so people would recollect things perfectly and have all the information, and they'd be honest, and we had a good quality sample that's representative of populations. That data set does not exist. And if someone claims it exists, it is not. There's no perfect data out there. There's usually any one of those things I just mentioned. There's elements to it, problems, issues with some of it. In Canada, it's very hard to get longitudinal data ahead of time. Usually it's cross-sectional, where we measure just at one time point, so we can't establish time order. And so you just got to work with what you got and be aware of it. And then that's where good theory comes in to fill the gaps that we don't necessarily have yet with all of the data. So something to keep in mind when you're doing quantitative data analysis and writing up results of quantitative data analysis. And so that's kind of the idea of this week. We're not actually doing quantitative data analysis together. Again, you're going to have a whole term with Owen in SOC 710 where you do that. But what I wanted you to see this week was kind of getting to see how we think about the bigger issues and ideas in quantitative data analysis. What are some of the key challenges and dynamics going on, some of the potential solutions as well. And to get a sense of kind of what we do in quantitative data analysis, those of us who publish in it regularly, like myself and like Owen, and some of the kind of big things we have to grapple with, so that when you go actually do the analyses with Owen next term, you have a good sense of kind of, what your data can bring to the table, but also the role that good theory should play in establishing those causal mechanisms. And that is the theory in quantitative methods. That's how we use theory, is really kind of figuring out those causal diagrams. Okay, what are all the potential factors at play? Let's go and test elements of those diagrams and fill them in eventually as more and more people test that theoretical model and complexify it, add new links to it, etc. And so that's how we use theory in quantitative methods. So whenever you hear a qualitative person complaining that quant people don't use theory, we do absolutely use theory. It's very important to us, but it's used often in a bit of a different way than, say, you might see it in qualitative research. In qualitative research, that it's not so much of a focus on that causal chain, on that causal diagram, even though some qualitative researchers do use that. It's usually kind of bigger. Quant people would criticize saying fuzzier, less precise, bigger theoretical models in qualitative research, and that's kind of like the tug and pull, the criticisms that you see on each side, with each big methods orientation, and how people use theory with those different methods orientations. Okay, so did want to end today with a few points on the research proposals. So I've said all I had to say about the Week 10 material. Hopefully that was helpful to you. Again, more discussion on the Week 10 discussion board, so go and see it if you're interested. And you'll continue with quantitative data analysis next term with Owen in 710. Most likely. I assume most of you are taking that course, because many of you have to for your degrees. But did want to kind of speak now for a few minutes for the final paper for this course, for 712 for this term, and which is meant to take the form of a research proposal. So we're about, by the time you watch this, just under 4 weeks out to that, so it's time to start thinking about your research proposals. Research proposals do not write themselves overnight, so make sure you give yourself enough time to write them. And if that's a matter of, for example, maybe you've completed all your discussion posts and required mini lectures, and so now it's time to move on to working on the research proposals for the time that you have for this course each week. And so the research proposals, there's a whole video on them. In Learn, And so you can find that under content, course requirements, research proposals, final research proposals. I did a whole instructions video, so please, if you haven't watched that yet, go and watch it. It's very important. And so you'll get all the major information there. A few things that I want to kind of mention. I'm looking for detailed, high-quality proposals. You have a lot of time to have thought about your proposals and work on them this term, in theory, hopefully in practice as well. And so I'm expecting, grad level proposals. And so that is use up all the space that I'm allocating you for this final paper. Don't sell it short and give many pages less. That's not cool. So definitely use all the pages you've got. And I want you to use all the relevant course material this term where relevant in your research proposals. So that is not only the readings we did or the videos we watched, but also the discussion boards, all of the discussion boards, my feedback videos, everything we've covered, right? And so wherever relevant, you should be applying it to your research proposal, how you're going to conduct either your real study or your hypothetical study, whichever you decide to go with for this research proposal. And so, do that. And if you don't do it, so if I notice that there were certain course materials that would have been really relevant for your study that you didn't refer to in your proposal, you will lose marks for that, right? And so make sure the whole point of any of these assignments this term for this course is to show me that you can apply what we covered in the course, the materials we covered, to, in this case, your own research, right? And so at this stage, if you're still unsure which project to go with, what specific project you want to focus on, now that we're like under 4 weeks out, it's time to pick one. I mean, again, this doesn't have to be forever, right? If you decide later on to change your master's thesis, your PhD dissertation, or whatever research interests you have, that's fine. But at this point, just pick one for now that interests you, hopefully, at least for this proposal, and go with it, right? This is time to do it. If you're struggling to do so, or you're not quite sure what you need in the proposal, like I said in that requirements video, I go over it, but if you're not quite sure what you're looking for in the proposal, there's some things you want to talk through, please do come see me during my office hours, Zoom or in person. I even highly recommend that everyone come see me at least once for their research proposals before the end of this term. I've still got lots of office hours, the Tuesdays and Fridays as usual, online, in person. And I'm very good at talking through research projects. I do this for a living. I've done this for, oh my gosh, at least 15 years now. I'm known for this. Like, people will come to me from other universities, like other faculty members, other profs, to be able to talk through methods, what's possible, what we can do. Hey, I'm interested in this. How do we actually frame it as a research question that's feasible? I'm very good at that. I love doing that. It's probably one of my favorite parts of my career, of my job. And so, so come see me and let's talk it through, and better to do that before and get some feedback from me on your proposal before you hand it in, and, to maximize the points you get. And also to make hopefully the process more enjoyable for you and more helpful in the end. That you actually develop the kind of best quality project you can, right? Even if you are not ending up using it in future for a thesis or dissertation, hopefully that's a helpful process for you for any job that you decide to go with after this degree. So remember that to guide you in the proposal process of what I'm looking for in the proposal, after each week in the syllabus, at the end of each week's content in the course syllabus, there's a few questions in italic font that I put there. And those are the questions I want you to address in your research proposal based on that weekly course material. So I go over them again quickly in the requirements video, but they're all there in the course syllabus. So week to week, what we covered each week that should be relevant for you to address in your research proposal. So definitely go and use those. They're there for you. It's getting busier. But I should be able to finish the video. One mistake that I've seen made in previous research proposals that have led to a lot less points than students probably should have gotten if they had done it properly was that way too much space in the proposal was given to the literature review. I mean, there should be some space to the literature review, and I give you guidelines for that in the requirements video, so go check that out. But the whole paper should not be a literature review, only part of it. What I want in the proposal is all the details about how you're going to conduct the study, right? What's the topic? Introduce the topic. know, what have others found about it, right? That literature review, but also what are the limitations of those existing studies? What are the gaps in our knowledge that still exist? Which lead nicely to what are your own research questions that you're going to address with this project? What's the theory that you're using to frame the study? What are the key concepts? How are you defining them? What frameworks are you using to tie those concepts together? Maybe hypotheses if you want. Those are optional in proposals, but you're welcome to use hypotheses if you want. And then specifically all the methodological details, specific details of how you'll conduct the study, right? What kind of research design are you going to use? How are you going to sample exactly, right? What materials are you gathering exactly? How are you going to analyze those materials, all in order to answer your research questions, right? So that's what I'm looking for in the research proposals. So make sure you give enough space to all of those elements and provide me detail. I don't want some like fuzzy, oh, you know, I'm gonna sample people and that's it. No, specifically, what kind of sample? Are we talking like a certain type of probability sample? Are you doing like a stratified sample or a certain type of non-probability sample? And specifically, how are you gonna do that? How are you gonna achieve that with this in practice for this project? Again, if you're doing a master's, an MRP, a master's thesis, or a PhD dissertation, those methods have to be quite feasible given the limited time and resources you actually have in your degree. But if you're doing a more hypothetical project, say your coursework MA, you're doing more hypothetical research proposal, in that case you can think big. It's like, oh, okay, well, presuming I had a grant of like $500,000 and 3 years to conduct this study, here's how I would sample, or here's the kind of data I would gather. If I had a research team of 4 interviewers, here's the kind of interviews that I would do. So you're welcome to do that, especially if you're in the coursework and it's a more hypothetical project. So anyways, like I said, any questions you have, and just to talk through your projects, come see me during office hours. I'm always happy to talk about that. I really love doing it. It's always fun seeing you, and I also love talking about research. Okay, so as you can see for the last few minutes, behind me is the last view of Elora Gorge. That's the river, I'll remember it this time. And I'm on the bridge that we saw earlier, that kind of white pillared bridge. I'm on it now, that's why we hear cars behind me, in front of me, in fact. And yeah, so we're getting into the end game now. Only a couple more weeks to go, weeks 11 and 12. Don't give up now. We're almost there. We're almost done. And keep going for it. And I know you're really busy at this time of the term and everything's coming together and it might be stressful, but hopefully nervous and excited. And sorry, I had a couple dogs go by. And so yeah, so keep going. Moral support from me, and come see me. Happy to chat. At some point I'll have Christmas lights up in my office, so you can come see those if you want. And yeah, I will see you all in the next video. Bye. Okay, so I didn't see much wildlife today. A few squirrels, a few cat geese. We've had them a couple times though. There were some chickadees, but they were hidden in the trees, so I couldn't film them. But I thought I'd show you a bit more of Elora. So I'm standing on the pedestrian bridge in the town center. And so that's the falls over there that are falling down that we saw at the start of the video behind me. And this is the little town or village, whatever you want to call it, of Elora. So this pedestrian bridge is pretty new. They built it a few years ago. So I thought I'd show you this instead. In about a couple hours, will be Ontario humans in their natural habitat of doing early Christmas shopping. All right, everyone. See you next week.